As we do in the first hour of the program, we bring you an article from Flow News 24 written by our Canberra correspondent John McDonnell, who's seen plenty that's happened in politics over many years from the Canberra bubble, and he's brought us an article today regarding Labor's prospects of winning the federal election. To me, it seems completely bizarre to think that Labor could even be with any shot of winning the federal election, but John makes an argument. He's created a triangle, a Bermuda triangle, if you like, for the federal government, where he references three problem areas for the government, and one of these I've certainly been talking about lately, which is with Indian Australians, but the other two elements of this Bermuda triangle for the government is women and Chinese Australian voters. There's been much that's been discussed about Prime Minister and the government's attitude towards women and the Brittany Higgins affair, if you like, when it comes to the allegations of sexual abuse and mistreatment of women at Parliament House in Canberra, and the government has tried fastidiously to push this off the headlines and get on with the job of governing. They've largely managed to achieve that. Mind you, Parliament hasn't been sitting for a while. They'll sit for the federal budget on Tuesday, and we'll be bringing you a budget preview on Tuesday and a budget wrap on Wednesday of what might have been missed in the federal budget. But certainly a big ticket item is going to be childcare and parental leave and other budget measures to appeal to women. The government knows it's got a problem in this area, and it's going to do its level best to try and appeal to female voters. We've covered a lot on Flow FM and on Flow News 24 about the Chinese government's sabre rattling in the Asia Pacific, particularly directed at Australia, and they've recently ceased an economic cooperation agreement with Australia, saying that we have a Cold War mentality towards China. So John McDonnell points out in his article those of Chinese origin who are torn between their mother country and their adopted country of Australia might not be inclined to vote for the Morrison government with the current range of measures towards China. Personally, I feel that that claim is a little overblown. The Chinese demographic, if you like, in Australia would be largely in inner city seats and could be a tipping factor, along with the Indian one I'll talk about in a moment. But people who are living in Australia now, who are Chinese Australians, I think a great many of them are here because they enjoy the freedoms that we have in Australia, and they may have sympathies for the Chinese government, but maybe they are dissidents or people who wanted to get away from the restrictions of living under the Chinese Communist Party. They may be very happy that Australia is actually pushing back on the Chinese government. But the government does have a problem now, I believe, with Indian Australian voters, simply because people would have been visiting family in India or have family members they'd like to see who are perhaps terribly sick, and they can't, and they've got a macro version of what we experience with lockdowns and border restrictions here in Australia. I think they will be terribly disenfranchised by this travel ban, particularly when you consider that there were not travel bans imposed on European countries and Australians coming back from those European countries at the time. Those people were able to come into hotel quarantine. And that's the final point I think is worth making, is that there is going to be a serious issue come Saturday week when repatriation flights begin, not just the Aussie cricketers who fled to the Maldives and want to come back, but a host of Australian citizens who will not be able to, I think, to be accommodated within hotel quarantine arrangements. We're talking about 11 or 12,000 people currently in India. We don't know how many will want to come back now, but the way the COVID crisis is going in India, there's certainly going to be a lot of people interested in coming home. They've got the Howard Springs facility in the Northern Territory. That's got about 1,000 beds. But I suspect that what might need to happen is that the coalition will have to swallow its pride and accept Daniel Andrews' offer. I hesitate to call it an offer. It was more of an audacious demand that he build a quarantine facility at Mickleham, north of Melbourne. He said, well, I'll put in $12 million. It's going to cost about $200 million federal government, so you can pay for the rest. The federal government balked at that at the time, but I think now they're going to have to come to the party, because it's not just India, but a host of other countries people will want to come home from. And I just come back to the lines of Peter Allen's song, I Still Call Australia Home. I think that's a powerful emotional factor for Aussies who've gone through a lot overseas, and we certainly should be enabling them to come home. Anyhow, John McDonnell outlines a whole lot more of his argument why Labor could win the federal election on the back of these three voters. Check it out at flownews24.com.au.